In the quiet town of Maple Creek, Ohio, Henry Sloan was a man almost everyone noticed but no one really knew. Each morning, without fail, he walked the same cracked sidewalk that ran past the shuttered library and the post office with its faded flag. His navy coat, frayed at the sleeves and long out of fashion, hung on his thin frame like a memory that wouldn't let go. The cane he carried clicked rhythmically with every step, marking time like an old metronome. He walked slowly but deliberately, like a man who still had places to be, even if the world had forgotten them. He lived alone in a room above the old train depot, in a building whose brick walls were soot-stained and ivy-choked. The landlady said he paid his rent early and never caused trouble. Neighbors guessed at his past. Some believed he was a retired postman who'd never stopped walking his route. Others said he had once worked at the railway station, dispatching trains before the lines were shut down. A few speculated he had no past at all, that he had simply appeared one day, with a limp and a coat, as though he had wandered out of a different time. Henry never corrected them. He nodded politely when spoken to, but shared nothing of himself. He never attended the church potlucks, never joined the veterans on Memorial Day, and never shopped for more than a single paper bag of groceries at a time. His only visible habits were his walks, his visits to the library where he borrowed war memoirs and history books, and his long hours at the bus stop bench near Main Street, where he sometimes sat without ever catching a bus. On a gray Tuesday morning in late October, Henry paused in front of the local pharmacy. The glass window was shattered, shards scattered across the sidewalk like crushed ice. Police tape fluttered lazily in the wind. The display of cold medicines and vitamins had been pushed inward, a few boxes spilled onto the floor behind the broken glass. Henry stared for a few moments, not moving, not even leaning on his cane. His face held no expression. Then, just as silently, he turned and continued walking, his limp steady, the cane resuming its slow rhythm. He reached the bus stop and sat down. The bench was cold and damp from the morning dew, but he showed no sign of discomfort. He folded his hands over the curved handle of his cane and waited, just as he always did. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up beside the curb. Inside were two young officers, Jarrett and Cole. They were still new to the town, recent graduates from the academy, eager to do things by the book. They had reviewed the surveillance footage from the pharmacy. It showed a tall man in a dark coat, walking with a limp, moving past the store moments before the alarm sounded. The figure hadn't looked into the camera, but the gait and silhouette were unmistakable. They believed they had their suspect. Jarrett stepped out of the cruiser first. He approached slowly but with purpose, hand near his belt. Cole followed, a little less certain. "Sir," Jarrett said, firm but not unkind. "We need to speak with you." Henry looked up, eyes tired but alert. He made no protest, no inquiry. Instead, he nodded once and carefully laid his cane beside him on the bench. Then, without being asked, he turned and offered his wrists. The cuffs clicked shut around them with a finality that seemed to echo louder than the sounds of morning traffic. Back at the precinct, the process unfolded with mechanical precision. His coat was removed and placed in an evidence bag. His personal items were logged and photographed, a silver pocket watch with the initials ECS engraved in looping script, a folded notebook filled with tightly written numbers and small diagrams, and a plain gold wedding band, dulled by age but lovingly worn. His fingerprints were taken. A much asterisk T was captured. He was asked his name and address. He provided both, softly and clearly, then fell silent once again. The holding cell was stark, metal bench, concrete walls, a single camera watching from above. Henry sat down with the slow care of someone used to pain. His back remained straight, his eyes forward. He did not ask for food or water. He did not request a phone call. He made no effort to explain himself or protest the arrest. He simply waited, as if accustomed to being misunderstood. The officers didn't know what to make of him. He was unlike the other suspects they'd processed, no belligerence, no evasiveness, no visible fear. Just calm. There was something in his posture, something in the way he scanned the room without urgency, that suggested discipline rather than confusion. Jarrett, reviewing the footage again at his desk, began to feel a flicker of doubt. The man in the video had a torn right sleeve. Henry's coat was old but intact. He remembered the limp from the video, but now questioned its authenticity. Could it have been a misdirection? A disguise? Or had they made a mistake? Cole watched from across the room as Henry sat in the cell. Something about the man's stillness unsettled him. He had processed loud criminals, violent ones, the desperate and the broken. But Henry did not belong to any of those categories. He looked wrong in that room. Not out of place by circumstance, but by principle. Still, paperwork had been filed. The pharmacy owner had insisted on pressing charges. The arrest was logged. Henry Sloan was now part of the system. But beyond the precinct walls, something else had been set in motion, something no one inside the station could yet see. Back at the pharmacy, the morning unfolded with its usual rhythm, receipts printed, customers trickled in, and employees swept up the glass from the broken window. But beneath that rhythm, something shifted. A second witness came forward, an older man named Ramon who operated the shoe repair shop across the street. He had been opening up early that day, as he did every Tuesday for his delivery from Akron. He told the responding officer that he'd seen someone run from the scene, not walk, not limp, but run, into the alley behind the hardware store. That man moved too fast to be old, he said, squinting into the distance as if replaying it all in his mind. No cane. Definitely not limping. Coat sleeve was ripped. Could have been dark blue, but who can tell at dawn? The officer, a veteran of small-town policing, didn't think much of it at first. But when he returned to the station and pulled up the surveillance footage again, something caught his eye. He slowed the video, frame by frame. The figure in the recording was fast, purposeful. And yes, there it was. The right sleeve of the coat was torn from the elbow down, flapping as the figure moved. A detail easily missed at normal speed. The coat was also slightly shorter than Henry's, the hem stopping higher on the legs. It was enough to raise a question. The officer walked over to the holding cells and looked at Henry, still sitting in the same position, unmoved. He radioed to Jarrett and Cole. "You sure this is our guy?" Before they could answer, the station's phone rang. Then it rang again. Then the chief's line. And then, suddenly, the front desk was flooded with calls. Voices on the other end asked questions the dispatchers weren't trained to answer. Some didn't introduce themselves. Some just gave first names and reference codes. But they all wanted to know the same thing: had a man named Henry Sloan been detained? In the span of 10 minutes, the precinct, built to handle traffic violations and local disputes, became the focal point of an invisible grid stretching far beyond Maple Creek. Outside, dark SUVs began appearing, one by one, then in groups of 3. They parked without urgency, but with the unmistakable precision of people used to being obeyed. Their license plates bore no local insignia. Their windows were blackened, their occupants unhurried. Men and women in dark suits stepped out first, eyes scanning the area like sensors. Then came the uniforms, not of Maple Creek's small police department, nor of the county sheriff's office. These were clean, tailored military uniforms bearing no unit designation. One man wore an earpiece and held a clipboard. Another had the posture of command, the kind that came from years of being obeyed without question. The precinct's air changed. Something unseen had entered. The officers, caught between confusion and unease, were instructed to clear the main hallway. The chief emerged from his office with a half-eaten granola bar in one hand and panic rising in his throat. Inside the holding area, Henry remained silent. He watched as officers moved more briskly, as whispers turned into hurried conversations, as tension flooded the room like smoke. But he did not stand. He made no comment. He simply adjusted his wedding ring slightly, a small, absent-minded motion, as though he were expecting this. Jarrett and Cole were called into the back office. The chief closed the door. A man in a military uniform stood with his hands folded behind his back, eyes still. "You arrested a man named Henry Sloan this morning," the officer said without introduction. Yes, sir, Jarrett replied. Match the description from the pharmacy incident. You're wrong, the man replied, evenly. That man is not a suspect. He is a protected federal asset. You were not meant to know he existed. The room fell silent. What kind of asset? Cole asked, his voice thin. The officer turned his head slightly. His identity has been sealed since 1987. That file is classified above your rank, your department, and your jurisdiction. This arrest triggered a failsafe. You need to release him. Now. Jarrett opened his mouth to respond, but the officer raised one hand, palm outward. This is not a request. Down the hallway, the door to the holding cells opened. Henry was quietly unshackled. He stood without help and collected his things, the pocket watch, the notebook, the ring. Each item was handled carefully by a man in gloves. A single fingerprint was lifted from the watch and verified on a secure device before it was returned. Henry looked at none of them. He walked forward, cane in hand, his coat buttoned, his steps steady. The corridor, lined now with watching eyes, parted to let him through. Outside, one of the black SUVs opened its rear door. Henry stepped inside. The door shut. The engine did not roar to life, it simply moved, smoothly and silently, away from the curb. The last to leave was the military officer. He turned to the chief and gave a single folder. Seal the report. Redact all footage. Delete his name from public records. You will receive further instructions within the hour. Then he walked out. Inside the precinct, no one spoke for a full minute. Jarrett sat heavily in his chair, the paper he'd been filling out still unfinished. Cole leaned against the wall, staring at the space where Henry had been just minutes ago. Nothing about the day made sense anymore. And then, from across the room, came the first ping of a phone. A video, posted by a teenager who'd been passing the bus stop that morning. It showed a quiet arrest. A man in an old coat, calmly handing over his cane, being handcuffed. Within minutes, it had been shared hundreds of times. By nightfall, it would be millions. Henry Sloan had disappeared, but his story was only beginning. Henry Sloan did not return to Maple Creek. At least, not in the way most expected. The black SUV that carried him away that Tuesday morning left no trail. No license plate matches, no camera footage. The vehicle bypassed toll booths and was never seen again. For most, Henry had simply vanished. But what remained, what refused to disappear, was the video. The teenager who had captured the arrest had only meant to post a clip. It was shaky, 10 seconds long. But it showed an elderly man standing still, calmly offering his wrists to be cuffed. There was no struggle. Just a face lined with age and a silence that looked more like endurance than surrender. The caption read, "They arrested this old man like a criminal." He just stood there like a statue. It exploded across social media. At first, it sparked outrage. Who was he? What did he do? Why was no one saying anything? The Maple Creek Police Department offered only the vaguest statements. We followed procedure. An internal review is underway. No further comment at this time. But silence rarely stops a storm. By the end of the week, someone leaked the internal booking report. A low-level clerk, maybe. No one knew. But it confirmed the name on the arrest log, Henry Sloan. That name meant little to most. But it meant something to a few. Within hours, anonymous posts appeared on military forums. Then message boards. Then podcasts. Fragments of stories began emerging. Sloan? That can't be real. That's the guy who pulled out a full convoy after Kandahar got hit. They used to say there was a man who could land in any country and blend in like fog. No uniform. No rank. Just results. My father mentioned him once. Said he was the reason their extraction plane ever made it off the ground. Speculation gave way to theory. Theory gave way to partial confirmation. Journalists began digging through declassified mission files from the late 80s and early 90s. Names were blacked out. But patterns emerged, footprints in the data that traced a man who always arrived alone and left after impossible missions succeeded. Someone unearthed a photograph, faded and creased. A group of men in camouflage standing in the desert. One man stood at the edge, half in shadow. He wore no insignia. No smile. But the build, the posture, the eyes, those who had seen the arrest video said it was him. His history wasn't clean. It was shadowed by redacted files and crossed-out lines. But the silence that once protected his past had now become the stage upon which his dignity stood. While officials scrambled to regain control of the narrative, Henry did the opposite. He issued no statement. He refused interviews. He did not sue. He did not accept offers from lawyers, journalists, or advocacy groups. The only sign of his reappearance was a single note taped to the door of his old room above the depot. Written in careful block letters, "Please allow quiet. No visitors." He didn't need a press conference. The world was already listening. Veterans across the country took to social media, many posting their own silent salutes, videos of them standing at attention in full dress, or walking to local war memorials and placing flowers. They didn't know what Henry had done. But they recognized the kind of man who carried something alone so others didn't have to. At the Maple Creek precinct, the atmosphere shifted from confusion to discomfort. Officers whispered to one another in the break room. Cole stopped wearing his badge off-duty. Jarrett, once so sure of his training, now second-guessed every description, every assumption. The footage had become national news. And with it, questions reached Washington. By the second week, an unnamed official confirmed that Henry Sloan was, in fact, the alias of a former operative embedded in classified military programs during the Cold War and beyond. While details were withheld, the official referred to his contributions as instrumental in maintaining national stability across 3 decades. It was the most anyone had ever said about Henry. And it wasn't enough to quiet the growing wave of reflection. In online forums and community gatherings, people began asking deeper questions, not just about Henry, but about the quiet ones they passed each day. The veterans who said nothing. The elderly who walked alone. The silent men with tired eyes and careful gaits. How many others were there? How many stories had never been told because the world never thought to ask? Meanwhile, Henry returned to his walks. Not in Maple Creek, but in another town, another state. Still alone, still silent. Wearing the same navy coat. Holding the same cane. Only now, when people passed him, they hesitated. Not in suspicion, but in respect. Children whispered to their parents, "Is that the man from the video?" Some wanted to thank him. None dared interrupt him. One morning, a child placed a folded note on the bench beside him. It read, in pencil and crooked letters, "Thank you for being strong. I want to be like you when I grow up." Henry read it. Folded it. Placed it in his notebook without a word. Back in Maple Creek, changes were beginning. And they started with guilt.